Section 10 of Ante-Nicene Christian Library. Translations of the writings of the Fathers down to A.D. 325. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Ante-Nicene Christian Library. Translations of the writings of the Fathers down to A.D. 325 by Alexander Roberts, editor. Section 10. The Acts of Pilate. This is the second Greek form. A narrative about the sufferings of our Lord Jesus Christ and his holy resurrection, written by a Jew, Aeneas by name, and translated out of the Hebrew tongue into the Romaic language by Nicodemus, a Roman toparch. After the dissolution of the kingdom of the Hebrews, 400 years having run their course, and the Hebrews also coming at last under the kingdom of the Romans, and the king of the Romans appointing them a king, when Tiberius Caesar at last swayed the Roman scepter in the 18th year of his reign, he appointed as king in Judea Herod, the son of the Herod who had formerly slaughtered the infants in Bethlehem. And he made Pilate procurator in Jerusalem. When Annas and Caiaphas held the high priesthood of Jerusalem, Nicodemus, a Roman toparch, having summoned a Jew, Aeneas by name, asked him to write an account of the things done in Jerusalem about Christ in the times of Annas and Caiaphas. The Jew accordingly did this and delivered it to Nicodemus, and he again translated it from the Hebrew writing into the Romaic language, and the account is as follows. Chapter 1. Our Lord Jesus Christ, having wrought in Judea many and great and extraordinary miracles, and on account of this being hated by the Hebrews, while Pilate was procurator in Jerusalem, and Annas and Caiaphas high priests, there came of the Jews to the chief priests Judas, Levi, Nephthalim, Alexander, Cyrus, and many others, speaking against Christ. And these chief priests sent them away to say things to Pilate also. And they went away and said to him, A man walks about in this city, whose father is called Joseph, and his mother Mary, and he calls himself king and son of God. And being a Jew, he overturns the scriptures, and does away with the Sabbath. Pilate then asked, in order to learn from them, in what manner he did away with the Sabbath. And they answered, saying, He cures the sick on the Sabbath. Pilate says, If he makes the sick whole, he does no evil. They say to him, If he effected the cures properly, small would be the evil, but by using magic he does these things, and by having the demons on his side. Pilate says, To cure a person that is ill is not a diabolic work, but a grace from God. The Hebrews said, We beseech your highness to summon him, in order that thou mayst make accurate inquiry into what we say. Pilate, therefore, throwing off his cloak, gave it to one of his officers, saying, Go away and show this to Jesus, and say to him, Pilate the procurator calls thee to come before him. The officer accordingly went away, and finding Jesus, summoned him, having unfolded on the ground also Pilate's mantle, and urged him to walk upon it. And the Hebrews, seeing this, and being greatly enraged, came to Pilate, murmuring against him, how he had deemed Jesus worthy of so great honor. And he, having inquired of the officer who had been sent how he had done so, the officer answered, When thou didst send me to the Jew Alexander, I came upon Jesus, entering the gate of the city, sitting upon an ass. And I saw that the Hebrews spread their garments in the way, and the ass walked upon the garments, and others cut branches, and they went forth to meet him, and cried out, Hosanna in the highest. Thus, therefore, it was necessary for me also to do. The Jews, hearing these words, said to him, How didst thou, being a Roman, know what was said by the Hebrews? The officer answered, I asked one of the Hebrews, and he told me these things. Pilate said, What means Hosanna? The Jews said, Save us, O Lord. Pilate answered, Since you confess that your children said so, how now do you bring charges and say against Jesus what you do say? The Jews were silent and had nothing to answer. Now as Jesus was coming to Pilate, the soldiers of Pilate adored him, and others also were standing before Pilate holding standards. And as Jesus was coming, the standards also bowed down and adored him. As Pilate therefore was wondering at what had happened, the Jews said to him, "My Lord, it was not the standards that adored Jesus, but the soldiers who were holding them carelessly." Pilate says to the ruler of the synagogue, "Choose 12 powerful men and give them the standards, so that they may hold them firmly." And this having taken place, Pilate ordered the officer to take Jesus outside and bring him in again. And as he was coming in, the standards again bowed down and adored him. Pilate therefore wondered greatly. But the Jews said, "He is a magician, and through that he does these things." Chapter 2. Pilate says to Jesus, "Hearest thou what these testify against thee, and answerest thou not?" And Jesus answered and said, "Every man has power to speak either good or bad, as he wishes. These also, therefore, having power, say what they wish." The Jews said to him, "What have we to say about thee? First, that thou wast begotten from sin. Second, that on account of thee, when thou wast born, the infants were murdered. Third, that thy father and thy mother fled into Egypt, because they had no confidence in the people." To these the Jews who were there present, God-fearing men, answered and said, "We say that his birth is not from sin, for we know that Joseph received into keeping his mother Mary, according to the practice of betrothal." Pilate said, "Consequently you lie who say that his birth is from sin." They say again to Pilate, "All the people testify that he is a magician." The God-fearing Jews answered and said, "We also were at the betrothal of his mother, and we are Jews, and know all his daily life. But that he is a magician, that we do not know." And the Jews that thus said were these: Lazarus, Astarius, Antonius, James, Zaras, Samuel, Isaac, Phineas, Crispus, Agrippas, Ames, and Judas. Pilate therefore says to them, "By the life of Caesar, I wish you to swear whether the birth of this man is without sin." They answered, "Our law lays down that we are to swear not at all, because an oath is great sin. Notwithstanding, by the life of Caesar, we swear that his birth is without sin. And if we lie, order us all to be beheaded." And when they had thus spoken, the Jews that were bringing the charge answered Pilate and said, "And dost thou believe these 12 single Jews more than all the multitude and us, who know for certain that he is a magician and blasphemer, and that he names himself Son of God?" Then Pilate ordered them all to go forth out of the praetorium, except the said 12 alone. And when this had been done, Pilate says to them privately, "As to this man, it appears that from envy and madness the Jews wish to murder him. For of one thing, that he does away with the Sabbath, they accuse him. But he then does a good work, because he cures the sick. For this sentence of death is not upon the man." The 12 also say to him, "Assuredly, my Lord, it is so." Chapter 3. Pilate therefore went out in rage and anger, and says to Annas and Caiaphas, and to the crowd who brought Jesus, "I take the sun to witness that I find no fault in this man." The crowd answered, "If he were not a sorcerer and a magician and a blasphemer, we should not have brought him to your highness." Pilate said, "Try him yourselves, and since you have a law, do as your law says." The Jews said, "Our law permits to put no man to death." Pilate says, "If you are unwilling to put him to death, how much more am I?" Then Pilate returned to the palace and says to Jesus, "Tell me, art thou the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Dost thou say this, or have the other Jews said this to thee, that thou mightst question me?" Pilate said, "Thou dost not think that I am a Hebrew. I am not a Hebrew. Thy people and the chief priests have delivered thee into my hands. And tell me if thou art king of the Jews." Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. For if my kingdom were in this world, my soldiers would not be unconcerned at my being seized. Wherefore my kingdom is not in this world. Pilate says, But art thou a king? Jesus said, Thou hast said, for this was I born, to bear witness to the truth. And if anyone be a man of the truth, he believes my word, and does it. Pilate says, What is the truth? Jesus answered, The truth is from the heavens. Pilate says, On earth, then, is there no truth? Christ says, I am the truth. And how is the truth judged on earth by those that have earthly power? Chapter 4. Pilate, therefore, leaving Christ alone, went outside and says to the Jews, I find no fault in this man. The Jews answered, Let us tell your highness what he said. He said, I am able to destroy the temple of God, and in 3 days to build it. Pilate says, And what temple did he say that he was to destroy? The Hebrews say, The temple of Solomon, which Solomon built in 46 years. Pilate says privately to the chief priests and the scribes and the Pharisees, I entreat you, do nothing evil against this man. For if you do evil against him, you will do unjustly. For it is not that such a man should die, who has done great good to many men. They said to Pilate, If my lord, he who has dishonored Caesar, is worthy of death, how much more this man who dishonors God? Then Pilate dismissed them, and they all went outside. Thereupon he says to Jesus, What dost thou wish that I shall do to thee? Jesus said to Pilate, Do to me as is determined. Pilate says, How is it determined? Jesus answered, Moses and the prophets wrote about me being crucified and rising again. The Hebrews, hearing this, said to Pilate, Why do you seek to hear a greater insult out of him against God? Pilate says, These words are not an insult against God, since they are written in the books of the prophets. The Hebrews said, Our scripture says, if a man offends against a man, that is to say, if he insults him, he is worthy to receive 40 strokes with a rod, but if anyone insult God, to be stoned. Then came a messenger from Procle, the wife of Pilate, to him, and the message said, Take care that thou do not agree that any evil should happen to Jesus, the good man, because during this night I have seen fearful dreams on account of him. And Pilate spoke to the Hebrews, saying, If you hold as insult against God the words which you declare Jesus to have spoken, take and judge him yourselves according to your law. The Jews said to Pilate, We wish that you should crucify him. Pilate says this is not good. And Pilate, turning towards the people, saw many weeping, and said, To me it seems that it is not the wish of all the people that this man should die. The priests and the scribes say, We on this account have brought all the people, that thou mightst have full conviction that all wish his death. Pilate says, For what evil hath he done? The Hebrews said, He says that he is a king and the Son of God. Chapter 5. A God-fearing Jew, therefore, Nicodemus by name, stood up in the midst, and said to Pilate, I entreat your highness to permit me to say a few words. Say on, said Pilate. Nicodemus says, I, being present in the synagogue, said to the priests and the Levites and the scribes and the people, What have you to say against this man? This man does many miracles, such as man has never yet done nor will do. Let him go, therefore, and if indeed what he does be from God, it will stand, but if from man, it will be destroyed. Just as happened also when God sent Moses into Egypt, and Pharaoh king of Egypt told him to do a miracle, and he did. Then Pharaoh had also 2 magicians, Jannes and Jambres, and they also did miracles by the use of magic art, but not such as Moses did. And the Egyptians held these magicians to be gods. But because they were not from God, what they did was destroyed. This Jesus then raised up Lazarus, and he is alive. On this account I entreat thee, my Lord, by no means to allow this man to be put to death. The Hebrews were enraged against Nicodemus, and said, Mayest thou receive the truth of Jesus, and have a portion with him? Nicodemus says, Amen, amen. Be it to me as you say. Chapter 6. And when Nicodemus had thus spoken, another Hebrew rose up and said to Pilate, I beg of thee, my lord Pilate, hear me also. Pilate answered, Say what thou wishest. The Hebrew says, I lay sick in bed 38 years, and when he saw me, he was grieved, and said to me, Rise, take up thy couch, and go into thine house. And while he was saying the word to me, I rose and walked about. The Hebrews say, Ask him on what day of the week this happened. He says, On Sabbath. The Jews said, And consequently we say truly that he does not keep the Sabbath. Another, again standing in the midst, said, I was born blind, and as Jesus was going along the road, I cried to him, saying, Have mercy upon me, Lord, thou Son of David. And he took clay and anointed mine eyes, and straightway I received my sight. Another said, I was crooked, and seeing him I cried, Have mercy upon me, O Lord. And he took me by the hand, and I was immediately raised. Another said, I was a leper, and he healed me merely by a word. Chapter 7. There was found there also a woman named Veronica, and she said, 12 years I was in an issue of blood, and I only touched the edge of his garment, and directly I was cured. The Jews said, Our laws do not omit the testimony of a woman. Chapter 8. Other men cried, This man is a prophet, and the demons are afraid of him. Pilate says, And how were the demons not at all thus afraid of your parents also? They say, We do not know. Others again said, Lazarus, after having been 4 days in the tomb, he raised by a single word. Pilate, therefore, hearing of the raising of Lazarus, was afraid, and said to the people, Why do you wish to shed the blood of a just man? Chapter 9. Then he summoned Nicodemus and the 12 God-fearing Jews, and said to them, What do you say that I should do? Because the people are in commotion. They say, We do not know. Do as thou wilt. But what the people do, they do unjustly, in order to kill him. Pilate again went outside and said to the people, You know that in the feast of unleavened bread it is customary that I free on your account one of the criminals kept in custody. I have therefore one malefactor in the prison, a robber named Barabbas. I have also Jesus, who has never done any evil. Which of the two, then, do you wish that I release to you? The people answered, Release to us Barabbas. Pilate says, What then shall I do with Jesus? They say, Let him be crucified. Again others of them cried out, If thou release Jesus, thou art no friend of Caesar, because he calls himself Son of God and King. And if thou free him, he becomes a king, and will take Caesar's kingdom. Pilate therefore was enraged, and said, Always has your nation been devilish and unbelieving, and ever have you been adversaries to your benefactors. The Hebrews say, And who were our benefactors? Pilate says, God, who freed you out of the hand of Pharaoh, and brought you through the Red Sea as upon dry land, and fed you with quails, and gave you water to drink out of the dry rock, and who gave you a law which, denying God, you broke. And if Moses had not stood and entreated God, you would have perished by bitter death. All these then you have forgotten. Thus also even now you say that I do not at all love Caesar, but hate him, and wish to plot against his kingdom. And having thus spoken, Pilate rose up from the throne with anger, wishing to flee from them. The Jews therefore cried out, saying, We wish Caesar to be king over us, not Jesus, because Jesus received gifts from the Magi. And Herod also heard this, that there was going to be a king, and wished to put him to death, and for this purpose sent and put to death all the infants that were in Bethlehem. And on this account also his father Joseph and his mother fled from fear of him into Egypt. So then Pilate, hearing this, silenced all the people, and said, This then is the Jesus whom Herod then sought that he might put him to death? They said to him, Yes. Pilate, therefore, having ascertained that he was of the jurisdiction of Herod, as being derived of the race of the Jews, sent Jesus to him. And Herod, seeing him, rejoiced greatly, because he had been long desiring to see him, hearing of the miracles which he did. He put on him, therefore, white garments. Then he began to question him. But Jesus did not give him an answer. And Herod, wishing to see also some miracle, or other done by Jesus, and not seeing it, and also because he did not answer him a single word, sent him back again to Pilate. Pilate, seeing this, ordered his officers to bring water. Washing then his hands with the water, he said to the people, "I'm innocent of the blood of this good man. See you to it that he is unjustly put to death, since neither I have found a fault in him nor Herod, for because of this he has sent him back again to me." The Jews said, "His blood be upon us and upon our children." Then Pilate sat down upon his throne to pass sentence. He gave order, therefore, and Jesus came before him. And they brought a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and a reed into his right hand. Then he passed sentence and said to him, "Thy nation says and testifies against thee that thou wishest to be a king. Therefore I decree that they shall beat thee first with a rod 40 strokes, as the laws of the kings decree, and that they shall mock thee, and finally that they shall crucify thee." Chapter 10. The sentence to this effect thus having been passed by Pilate, the Jews began to strike Jesus, some with rods, others with their hands, others with their feet, some also spat in his face. Immediately, therefore, they got ready the cross and gave it to him, and flew to take the road. And thus going along, bearing also the cross, he came as far as the gate of the city of Jerusalem. But as he, from the many blows and the weight of the cross, was unable to walk, the Jews, out of the eager desire they had to crucify him as quickly as possible, took the cross from him and gave it to a man that met them, Simon by name, who had also 2 sons, Alexander and Rufus, and he was from the city of Cyrene. They gave the cross then to him, not because they pitied Jesus and wished to lighten him of the weight, because they eagerly desired, as has been said, to put him to death more speedily. Of his disciples, therefore, John followed him there. Then he came fleeing to the Mother of God, and said to her, "Where hast thou been, that thou hast not come to see what has happened?" She answered, "What is it that has happened?" John says, "Know that the Jews have laid hold of my master, and are taking him away to crucify him." Hearing this, his mother cried out with a loud voice, saying, my son, what evil then hast thou done, that they are taking thee away to crucify thee?" And she rose up as if blinded, and goes along the road weeping. And women followed her, Martha and Mary Magdalene, and Salome, and other virgins, and John also was with her. When therefore they came to the multitude of the crowd, the Mother of God says to John, "Where is my son?" John says, "Seest thou him bearing the crown of thorns, and having his hands bound?" And the Mother of God, hearing this, and seeing him, fainted, and fell backwards to the ground, and lay a considerable time. And the women, as many as followed her, stood round her and wept. And as soon as she revived and rose up, she cried out with a loud voice, "My Lord, my son, where has the beauty of thy form sunk? How shall I endure to see thee suffering such things?" And thus saying, she tore her face with her nails, and beat her breast. "Where are they gone," said she, "the good deeds which thou didst in Judea? What evil hast thou done to the Jews?" The Jews then, seeing her thus lamenting and crying, came and drove her from the road. But she would not flee, but remained, saying, "Kill me first, ye lawless Jews." Then they got safe to the place called Cranium, which was paved with stone. And therefore the Jews set up the cross. Then they stripped Jesus, and the soldiers took his garments, and divided them among themselves. And they put on him a tattered robe of scarlet, and raised him, and drew him up on the cross at the 6th hour of the day. After this they brought also 2 robbers, the one on his right, the other on his left. Then the Mother of God, standing and looking, cried out with a loud voice, saying, my son, my son." And Jesus, turning to her, and seeing John near her, and weeping with the rest of the woman, said, "Behold thy son." And then he says also to John, "Behold thy mother." And she wept much, saying, "For this I weep, my son, because thou sufferest unjustly, because the lawless Jews have delivered thee to a bitter death. Without thee, my son, what will become of me? How shall I live without thee? What sort of life shall I spend? Where are thy disciples who boasted that they would die with thee? Where are those healed by thee? How has no one been found to help thee?" And looking to the cross, she said, "Bend down, O cross, that I may embrace and kiss my son, whom I suckle at these breasts after a strange manner, as not having known man. Bend down, O cross, I wish to throw my arms round my son. Bend down, O cross, that I may bid farewell to my son like a mother." The Jews, hearing these words, came forward, and drove to a distance both her and the women and John. Then Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Father, let not this sin stand against them, for they know not what they do." Then he says, "I thirst." And immediately there ran one of the soldiers, and took a sponge, and filled it with gall and vinegar mixed, and gave it on a reed, and gave Jesus to drink. And having tasted it, he would not drink it. And the Jews, standing and looked on, laughed at him, and said, "If thou truly sayest that thou art the Son of God, come down from the cross, and immediately, that we may believe in thee." Others said, mocking, "Others he saved, others he cured, and he healed the sick, the paralytic, the lepers, the demoniacs, the blind, the lame, the dead, and himself he cannot cure." In the same manner also the robber crucified on his left hand said to him, "If thou art the Son of God, come down and save both thyself and us." His name was Gistus. And he that was crucified on the right, Dismas by name, reproved that robber, saying, "O wretched and miserable man, dost thou not fear God? We suffer the due punishment of what we have done, but this man has done no evil at all." And turning to Jesus, he says to him, "Lord, when thou shalt reign, do not forget me." And he said to him, "Today, I tell thee truth, I shall have thee in paradise with me." Chapter 11. Then Jesus, crying out with a loud voice, "Father, into thy hands I shall commit my spirit," breathed his last. And immediately one could see the rocks rent, for there was an earthquake over all the earth, and from the earthquake being violent and great, the rocks also were rent. And the tombs of the dead were opened, and the curtain of the temple was rent, and there was darkness from the 6th hour till the 9th. And from all these things that had happened, the Jews were afraid, and said, "Certainly this was a just man." And Longinus, the centurion who had stood by, said, "Truly this was a Son of God." Others coming and seeing him beat their breasts from fear, and again turned back. And the centurion, having perceived all these so great miracles, went away and reported them to Pilate. And when he heard, he wondered and was astonished, and from his fear and grief would neither eat nor drink that day. And he sent notice, and all the Sanhedrin came to him as soon as the darkness was past. And he said to the people, "You know how the sun has been darkened. You know how the curtain has been rent. Certainly I did well in being by no means willing to put to death the good man." And the malefactor said to Pilate, "This darkness is an eclipse of the sun, such as has happened also at other times." Then they said to him, "We hold the feast of unleavened bread tomorrow, and we entreat thee, since the crucified are still breathing, that their bones be broken, and that they be brought down." Pilate said, "It shall be so." He therefore sent soldiers, and they found the two robbers yet breathing, and they broke their legs, but finding Jesus dead, they did not touch him at all, except that a soldier speared him in the right side, and immediately there came forth blood and water. And as the day of the preparation was drawing toward evening, Joseph, a man well born and rich, a God-fearing Jew, finding Nicodemus, whose sentiments his foregoing speech had shown, says to him, "I know that thou didst love Jesus when living, and didst gladly hear his words, and I saw thee fighting with the Jews on his account. If then it seems good to thee, let us go to Pilate and beg the body of Jesus for burial, because it is a great sin for him to lie unburied." "I am afraid," said Nicodemus, "lest Pilate should be enraged, and some evil should befall me. But if thou wilt go alone and beg the dead, and take him, then will I also go with thee, and help thee to do everything necessary for the burial." Nicodemus having thus spoken, Joseph directed his eyes to heaven, and prayed that he might not fail in his request. And he went away to Pilate, and having saluted him, sat down. Then he says to him, "I entreat thee, my lord, not to be angry with me, if I shall ask anything contrary to what seems good to your highness." And he said, "And what is it that thou ask?" Joseph says, "Jesus, the good man, whom through hatred the Jews have taken away to crucify, Him I entreat that thou give me for burial." Pilate says, "And what has happened that we should deliver to be honored again the dead body of whom against whom evidence of sorcery was brought by his nation, and who was in suspicion of taking the kingdom of Caesar, and so was given up by us to death?" And Joseph, weeping and in great grief, fell at the feet of Pilate, saying, "My Lord, let no hatred fall upon a dead man, for all the evil that a man has done should perish with him in his death. And I know, your highness, how eager thou wast that Jesus should not be crucified, and how much thou saidst to the Jews on his behalf, now in entreaty and again in anger, and at last how thou didst wash thy hands, and declare that thou wouldst by no means take part with those who wished him to be put to death. For all which reasons I entreat thee not to refuse my request." Pilate therefore, seeing Joseph thus lying and supplicating and weeping, raised him up and said, "Go, I grant thee this dead man. Take him and do whatever thou wilt." And then Joseph, having thanked Pilate, and kissed his hands and his garments, went forth, rejoicing indeed in heart as having obtained his desire, but carrying tears in his eyes. Thus also, though grieved, he was glad. Accordingly he goes away to Nicodemus, and discloses to him all that had happened. Then, having brought myrrh and aloes 100 pounds, and a new tomb, they, along with the Mother of God, and Mary Magdalene, and Salome, along with John and the rest of the women, did what was customary for the body with white linen, and placed it in the tomb. And the Mother of God said, weeping, "How am I not to lament thee, my son? How should I not tear my face with my nails? This is that my son which Simeon the elder foretold to me, when I brought thee, an infant of 40 days old, into the temple. This is the sword which now goes through my soul. Who shall put a stop to my tears, my sweetest son? No one at all, except thyself alone, if, as thou sayest, thou shalt rise again in 3 days." Mary Magdalene said, weeping, "Hear, O peoples, tribes, and tongues, and learn to what death the lawless Jews have delivered him, who did them 10,000 good deeds. Hear and be astonished. Who will let these things be heard by all the world? I shall go alone to Rome, to the Caesar. I shall show him what evil Pilate hath done in obeying the lawless Jews." Likewise also Joseph lamented, saying, "Ah me, sweetest Jesus, most excellent of men, if indeed it be proper to call thee man, who hast wrought such miracles as no man has ever done, how shall I enshroud thee? How shall I entomb thee? There should now have been here those whom thou feddest with a few loaves, for thus should I not have seemed to fail in what is due." Then Joseph, along with Nicodemus, went home, and likewise also the Mother of God, with the women, John also being present with them. Chapter 12. When the Jews were made acquainted with these things done by Joseph and Nicodemus, they were greatly stirred up against them. And the chief priests Annas and Caiaphas sent for Joseph, and said, "Why hast thou done this service to Jesus?" Joseph says, "I know that Jesus was a man just and true and good in all respects, and I know also that you, through hatred, managed to murder him, and therefore I buried him." Then the high priests were enraged, and laid hold of Joseph, and threw him into prison, and said to him, "If we had not tomorrow the feast of unleavened bread, tomorrow also should we have put thee, like him, to death. But being kept in the meantime, early in the morning of the Lord's day thou shalt be given up to death." Thus they spoke, and affixed their seal to the prison, having secured it by fastenings of all sorts. Thus, therefore, when the preparation was ended early on the Sabbath, the Jews went away to Pilate, and said to him, "My Lord, that deceiver said that after 3 days he should rise again. Lest therefore his disciples should steal him by night, and lead the people astray by such deceit, order his tomb to be guarded." Pilate therefore upon this gave them 500 soldiers, who also sat round the sepulchre, so as to guard it, after having put seals upon the stone of the tomb. The Lord's day then having dawned, the chief priests among them, with the Jews, called a council, and sent to take Joseph out of the prison in order to put him to death. But having opened it, they found him not, and they were astonished at this, how with the doors shut, and the bolts safe, and the seals unbroken, Joseph had disappeared. Chapter 13. And upon this there came up one of the soldiers guarding the tomb, and he said in the synagogue, Learn that Jesus has risen. The Jews said, How? And he said, First there was an earthquake, then an angel of the Lord, clothed with lightning, came from heaven, and rolled the stone from the tomb, and sat upon it. And from fear of him all of us soldiers became as dead, and were able neither to flee nor speak. And we heard the angel saying to the woman who came there to see the tomb, Be not you afraid, as I know that you seek Jesus. He is not here, but is risen, as he told you before. Bend down and see the tomb where his body lay, but go and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead, and let them go into Galilee, for there shall they find him. For this reason I tell you this first. The Jews said to the soldiers, What sort of women were there who came to the tomb? Why did you not lay hold of them? The soldiers say, From the fear and the mere sight of the angel, we were able neither to speak nor move. The Jews said, As the God of Israel liveth, we do not believe a word you say. The soldiers say, Jesus did so great wonders, and you believe not. And are you going to believe us? You say truly that God liveth, and certainly he whom you crucified truly liveth. But we have heard that you had Joseph shut up in the prison, and that you afterwards opened the doors and did not find him. Do you then present Joseph, and so also shall we present Jesus? The Jews say, Joseph that fled from the prison you will find in Arimathea, his own country. And the soldiers say, Go you too into Galilee, and you will find Jesus, as the angel said to the women. At these words the Jews were afraid, and said to the soldiers, See that you tell this story to nobody, or all will believe in Jesus. And for this reason they gave them also much money. And the soldiers said, We are afraid lest by any chance Pilate hear that we have taken money, and he will kill us. And the Jews said, Take it, and we pledge ourselves that we shall speak to Pilate in your defense. Only say that you are asleep, and in your slumber the disciples of Jesus came and stole them from the tomb. The soldiers therefore took the money, and said as they were bid. And up to this day this same lying tale is told among the Jews. Chapter 14. And a few days after there came from Galilee to Jerusalem 3 men. One of them was a priest by name Phinehas, the second a Levite by name Aggai, and the third a soldier by name Attis. These came to the chief priests and said to them and to the people, Jesus whom you crucified we have seen in Galilee with his 11 disciples upon the Mount of Olives, teaching them and saying, Go into all the world and proclaim the good news. And whosoever will believe and be baptized shall be saved, but whosoever will not believe shall be condemned. And having thus spoken, he went up into heaven, and both we and many others of the 500 besides were looking on. And when the chief priests and the Jews heard these things, they said to these 3, Give glory to the God of Israel, and repent of these lies that you have told. They answered, As the God of our fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob liveth, we do not lie, but tell you the truth. Then the high priest spoke, and they brought the old covenant of the Hebrews out of the temple, and he made them swear, and giving them also money, he sent them into another place, in order that they might not proclaim in Jerusalem the resurrection of Christ. And when these stories had been heard by all the people, the crowd came together into the temple, and there was a great commotion. For many said, Jesus has risen from the dead, as we hear, and why did you crucify him? And Annas and Caiaphas said, Do not believe, ye Jews, what the soldiers say, and do not believe that they saw an angel coming down from heaven. For we have given money to the soldiers, in order that they should not tell such tales to anyone. And thus also have the disciples of Jesus given them money, in order that they should say that Jesus has risen from the dead. Chapter 15. Nicodemus says, O children of the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the prophet Elias went up into the height of heaven with a fiery chariot, and is nothing incredible if Jesus too has risen. For the prophet Elias was a prototype of Jesus, in order that you, hearing that Jesus has risen, might not disbelieve. I therefore say and advise that it is befitting that we send soldiers into Galilee, to that place where these men testify that they saw him with his disciples, in order that we may go round him and find him, and that thus we may ask pardon of him for the evil which we have done to him." This proposal pleased them, and they chose soldiers and sent them away into Galilee. And Jesus indeed they did not find, but they found Joseph in Arimathea. When therefore the soldiers had returned, the chief priests, having ascertained that Joseph was found, brought the people together and said, "What shall we do to get Joseph to come to us?" After deliberating, therefore, they wrote to him a letter to the following effect: "O Father Joseph, peace be to thee and all thy house and thy friends. We know that we have offended against God and against thee his servant. On account of this we entreat thee to come here to us thy children. For we have wondered much how thou didst escape from the prison, and we say in truth that we had an evil design against thee. But God, seeing that our designs against thee were unjust, has delivered thee out of our hands. But come to us, for thou art the honor of our people." This letter the Jews sent to Arimathea with 7 soldiers, friends of Joseph, and they went away and found him, and having respectfully saluted him, as they had been ordered, they gave him the letter. And after receiving it and reading it, he glorified God, and embraced the soldiers, and having set a table, ate and drank with them during all the day and the night. And on the following day he set out with them to Jerusalem, and the people came forth to meet him and embraced him, and Nicodemus received him into his own house. And the day after, Annas and Caiaphas, the chief priests, having summoned him to the table, said to him, "Give glory to the God of Israel, and tell us the truth. For we know that thou didst bury Jesus, and on this account we laid hold of thee, and locked thee up in prison. Thereafter, when we sought to bring thee out to be put to death, we did not find thee, and we were greatly astonished and afraid. Moreover, we prayed to God that we might find thee, and asked thee, Tell us therefore the truth." Joseph said to them, "In the evening of the preparation, when you secured me in prison, I fell a praying throughout the whole night, and throughout the whole day of the Sabbath. And at midnight I see the prison house, that 4 angels lifted it up, holding it by the 4 corners. And Jesus came in like lightning, and I fell to the ground from fear. Taking hold of me, therefore, by the hand, he raised me, saying, 'Fear not, Joseph.' Thereafter, embracing me, he kissed me, and said, 'Turn thyself, and see who I am.' Turning myself, therefore, and looking, I said, 'My Lord, I know not who thou art.' He says, 'I am Jesus, whom thou didst bury the day before yesterday.' I say to him, 'Show me the tomb, and then I shall believe.' He took me, therefore, by the hand, and led me away to the tomb, which had been opened. And seeing the linen and the napkin, and recognizing him, I said, 'Blessed be he that cometh in the name of the Lord.' And I adored him. Then taking me by the hand, and accompanied by the angels, he brought me to my house in Arimathea, and said to me, 'Sit here for 40 days, for I go to my disciples, in order that I may enable them fully to proclaim my resurrection.'" Chapter 16. When Joseph had thus spoken, the chief priests cried out to the people, "We know that Jesus had a father and mother. How can we believe that he is the Christ?" One of the Levites answered and said, "I know the family of Jesus, noble-minded men, great servants of God, and receiving tithes from the people of the Jews. And I know also Simeon the elder, that he received him when he was an infant, and said to him, 'Now thou sendest away thy servant, O Lord.'" The Jews said, "Let us now find the 3 men that saw him on the Mount of Olives, that we may question them, and learn the truth more accurately." They found them, and brought them before all, and made them swear to tell the truth. And they said, "As the God of Israel liveth, we saw Jesus alive on the Mount of Olives, and going up into heaven." Then Annas and Caiaphas took the 3 apart, one by one, and questioned them singly in private. They agreed with one another, therefore, and gave even the 3 one account. The chief priests answered, saying, "Our scripture says that every word shall be established by 2 or 3 witnesses." Joseph then has confessed that he, along with Nicodemus, attended to the body and buried him. And how is it truth that he has risen? End of section 10.